I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply.
1 minute ago, King Charles signed a secret royal decree, and what it said has shattered the monarchy. With one stroke of the pen, Camilla's entire family was erased from royal life.
She was the third person in the marriage. She needed to rehabilitate her image.
You and your brother both directly asked your dad not to marry Camilla.
Yes.
No titles, no privileges, no future. And the Queen? She wasn't warned. What followed behind palace doors was betrayal, collapse, and threats of revenge that could bring the monarchy to its knees. But why did Charles do it? And what was hidden in a letter from Princess Diana that made this moment inevitable?
From being a vilified royal mistress to the woman who will now shape the future of the monarchy, Camilla Parker Bowles has come a long way in the eyes of her nation and the world.
The decree. It happened behind closed doors, inside the Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace, a space rarely used for official business and never for decisions of this magnitude. The curtains were drawn, the attendees few. Only Princess Anne, Prince William, and a handful of trusted aides stood witness as King Charles quietly unfolded a single document. Sources close to the palace describe the atmosphere as unbreathable. The decree itself, said to be composed in private over the span of several weeks, bore the royal crest, but none of the usual diplomatic language. It was direct, clinical, final. With a weighted pen and a moment of hesitation, the king signed it. What the document outlined has since sent shockwaves through royal circles. Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, along with their descendants, were officially and irrevocably removed from all royal ceremonial, representational, and honorary privileges. Not from the line of succession, they were never legally part of it, but from something far more nuanced and symbolic: public proximity to the crown. From this day forward, they would receive no titles, hold no royal honors, and play no future role in official royal affairs. Their quiet inclusion in events, their gradual acceptance within palace walls, erased.
I think there's a sort of sense of both disappointment and exasperation at the palace that the couple feel the need to keep going on about how miserable they were in their royal existence.
The king, it's said, uttered only 4 words before placing the decree in Princess Anne's hands: no room for confusion. Aides reportedly froze. One longtime staffer dropped the tray they were carrying. Another was seen leaving the room with tears in her eyes, having served both Camilla and her children for years. The silence that followed wasn't routine protocol. It was stunned disbelief. Camilla had not been informed. By the time she was summoned to the palace, the ink had dried, the document sealed, delivered, archived. Footage from an internal surveillance camera, never meant to be seen outside palace walls, reportedly shows her arriving breathless, flanked by 2 private attendants. She moved quickly, determined, until she saw the sealed folder in Anne's hands. That's when her body visibly faltered. She stopped, placed one hand on the wall for balance, and whispered something inaudible. Moments later, she collapsed. Sources say Charles remained behind the chamber doors. He did not speak. He did not follow. He simply handed the signed decree to Anne and left the room through a private corridor. Those close to the king say the decision was not made in anger, nor out of personal vengeance. It was, as one insider put it, an act of preservation, one the monarchy was too afraid to make until now. Behind the palace walls. The moment the decree was signed, the palace changed. Not visibly, not at first, but something beneath the polished marble and centuries-old routine fractured. A quiet chaos began to ripple through the royal residence, muffled behind protocol and layers of practiced restraint. The immediate inner circle, that is, those who had served Charles and Camilla for decades, reacted not with protest, but with silence. Aides stood still, hands clasped behind their backs, avoiding one another's eyes. Some whispered in corridors. Others left their posts entirely, disappearing before questions could be asked. According to palace insiders, at least 3 senior staffers resigned by the end of the day. 2 of them did in protest, and 1 in what was described as silent solidarity with the Queen. Behind closed doors, Prince William and Princess Anne remained with the King. Their expressions, according to one witness, were composed but unreadable. They had known. They had seen the letter. They had watched Charles deliberate for weeks, tortured by guilt, pressed between the woman he married and the woman the world never let him forget. Anne, ever loyal to both crown and family, had reportedly encouraged swift, clean action. William, sharpened by years of watching his father struggle to balance private emotion with public expectation, did not speak much in those meetings. But his presence, firm and unwavering, said enough. Camilla's arrival came too late. She had been summoned, not told why. Escorted through the East Gallery, she was reportedly calm, if concerned, until she entered the receiving corridor and saw the faces waiting for her.
And he's probably spent more time thinking about it. For the rest of us, it's more a question of, okay, we have to shift the way we support.
Not a word was spoken, but the weight of what had happened met her like a wall. A royal aide close to the scene described the moment. She wasn't angry, not at first. She looked stunned, like her entire world had suddenly been redrawn without her consent. As she reached the entrance to the private chamber, Princess Anne stepped forward and handed her the sealed document. Camilla took one glance at the crest, then another at the empty hallway behind the door where Charles had been just moments earlier, and collapsed against the stone column. Not out of theatricality, but something deeper, something final. Medical staff were called but dismissed shortly after. Camilla recovered quickly, physically at least. She stood, straightened her coat, and left the palace without another word. Outside, flashbulbs waited. Reporters had caught wind of something unusual inside the palace. Camilla did not speak, but her face was pale, expressionless. It barely held back. No official statement was released. But inside palace walls, word spread fast. King Charles removed Camilla's family from the royal line of succession. Quietly, symbolically, without her knowledge or consent. And for many on the inside, the silence was more shocking than the decision itself. Because this wasn't just a private marital rift, it was a public reordering of power. A line had been drawn between the sovereign bloodline and everyone else. Now, what were the true details of the letters? And what history did they withhold? Continue watching to find out. The hidden letter. If the signing of the decree shocked the monarchy, the discovery that led to it shook Charles to his core. It began quietly, almost innocuously, during what was meant to be a routine archival project following the death of Queen Elizabeth. In the months after her passing, Princess Anne took on the solemn task of reviewing personal correspondences, private journals, and sealed records from the late Queen's private collection. Most were historical, some deeply personal. All were marked for careful cataloging. But in one small, unlabeled envelope, sealed with wax and bearing only the initials CWTO beneath a rose insignia, Anne found something else entirely. Inside was a folded sheet of parchment. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Diana. The letter was not addressed to the public, nor to her sons. It was for Charles. Written in the months before her tragic death, the tone was raw, urgent, and heartbreakingly lucid. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. You must not allow sentiment to cloud your responsibility to the crown, she wrote. One day, you may find yourself with someone by your side who does not share the blood of your sons. You must protect them. You must guard their place. And should William have a daughter, her future must be secured above all. She will carry more than your name. She will carry the people's heart. The letter was many things. It was a mother's grief, a woman's foresight, a queen who never was, trying to preserve a legacy that still felt endangered. Anne, reading it alone in the Queen's private study, reportedly sat in silence for nearly an hour. No staff were permitted entry. She later instructed that the letter be handed directly to Charles, with no intermediaries. What happened after that, only a few insiders truly know.
Know that as much as we have now the reign of King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla, the future is William and Kate.
And their children as well.
But according to a senior aide, Charles read the letter alone in his private chambers and did not emerge for hours. One staffer, bringing tea, described hearing a sound like someone breaking apart from the inside. He had long compartmentalized Diana's memory. He had grieved, buried guilt, and tried, however imperfectly, to rebuild. But this was her voice, her final thoughts, her direct instructions, and they cut deeper than anything the public had ever said. What disturbed him most was not her mention of Camilla. In fact, she never named her. What unsettled him was the clarity with which Diana predicted exactly what had happened. The slow rise of a family without a royal bloodline, nudging ever closer to ceremonial influence. A reshaping of the monarchy by proximity, not legitimacy. And worse, he feared she had been right. Those close to Charles described the following days as a return to his military mindset. Quiet, disciplined, cold. He requested the letter be locked in the royal archive, but not before taking a private photocopy and placing it in a folder marked Act of Rectification. It was not a term used lightly. In royal protocol, it signals a corrective decision, one meant to uphold the sanctity of tradition, even if it causes personal cost. And that's when he began drafting the decree. Not in anger, not in haste, but in the solemn, grinding realization that Diana's final words had demanded action. The monarchy could not be shaped by affection. It had to be bound by blood, duty, and legacy. The letter, one aide said, didn't just remind him of who Diana was. It reminded him of who he used to be and what he was supposed to become. Ghost of legacy. For years, Camilla's presence in the monarchy was a balancing act. Quiet acceptance on the surface, uneasy silence underneath. To the public, her marriage to Charles in 2005 marked the end of a scandal and the start of redemption. But behind palace walls, the past was never fully buried, and the legacy of Princess Diana was never far from reach. The royal family may have offered Camilla a title, but the world had crowned someone else long before her. Diana wasn't just loved, she was mythologized. And that myth, wrapped in tragedy, grace, and injustice, remained the invisible shadow in every room Camilla entered. Over time, Camilla found her footing. She embraced royal duties, attended engagements, stood beside the king with calm composure. The public softened, if not out of affection, then out of fatigue. Her reputation began to stabilize, but it was not affection she sought. It was legitimacy. And legitimacy in the royal world is measured not in approval, but in lineage. That's where the quiet ambition began to surface. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, Camilla's children from her previous marriage, were never granted titles, nor were they formally included in royal hierarchy. But slowly, they began to appear. At charity galas, seated near senior royals, attending events typically reserved for those born into the bloodline. To outsiders, it seemed harmless. Camilla was simply including her family. But inside the firm, unease grew. They weren't in the line, one courtier explained, but they were being positioned as if they were.
I don't think that we can ever have peace with my family unless the truth is out there.
Sources say Prince William, protective of his mother's legacy and sharply attuned to palace dynamics, grew increasingly uncomfortable. Princess Catherine, always composed but perceptive, reportedly took note of every seating arrangement, every photo opportunity, every guest list leak that included Tom or Laura alongside high-ranking royals. It wasn't just inclusion, it was proximity with purpose. The fear wasn't that Camilla's children would one day claim a throne. It was that they were being woven into the fabric of the monarchy without ever having earned a thread of it. And then came the whispers. A comment allegedly overheard by a senior staffer, a passing remark from Laura Lopes at a private event, suggested that her family's growing presence was long overdue. Another report claimed she bristled at protocol that excluded her children from certain privileges afforded to Princess Charlotte or Prince George. The comment made its way back to Catherine. From that moment forward, according to insiders, the mood inside Kensington Palace shifted. William became more guarded. Catherine, less tolerant of ambiguity. The slow-motion campaign Camilla had been orchestrating, not to crown her children, but to cement their visibility, had crossed an invisible line. What Camilla saw as fairness, others saw as encroachment. But Charles? He stayed silent. He neither elevated Camilla's children nor distanced them. He walked a tightrope, balancing personal loyalty with royal decorum. Until Diana's letter arrived. And silence, finally, was no longer an option. The past had returned as a command, not as a memory. Now the purge begins. Keep watching as we unveil what happened next, inside the royal household. The symbolic purge. Once the decision was made, Charles moved with a clarity he hadn't shown in years. For too long, he had tried to navigate the monarchy as both a husband and a father, a sovereign and a man still haunted by his past. But the discovery of Diana's letter shifted something permanent. It recentered his sense of duty around legacy, not partnership. Camilla's children had never posed a constitutional threat. There was no law that included them in the line of succession, no royal charter that gave them a claim. But what Charles recognized, what Diana had anticipated, was the slow erosion of symbolic order. The monarchy didn't simply rest on blood. It relied on the public's belief in that bloodline's unbroken sanctity. In the quiet spaces between ceremonies and traditions, Camilla had been redrawing boundaries. Her children had never worn crowns, but they had been granted access. Invitations, proximity. Slowly, subtly, a new narrative had been forming. This narrative was one where presence became privilege. And that narrative, if left unchecked, would blur the lines that Diana had begged Charles to protect. So Charles acted, not to punish, but to preserve. The decree he signed did not strip titles that had never existed. Instead, it formalized a boundary that had long been unofficial. It ensured that Camilla's descendants would have no ceremonial roles, no honors, no appearances tied to the institution. They would no longer represent the crown, even in a supportive capacity. It was not a legal purge. It was a symbolic one. And for the monarchy, symbolism has always meant everything. As the news rippled through inner circles, public attention began to shift. The figure at the center of that shift wasn't Charles. It wasn't even Camilla. It was someone smaller, younger, and entirely unprepared for the weight now placed upon her. It was Princess Charlotte. The public had long drawn comparisons between Charlotte and her grandmother Diana. The likeness was subtle but persistent. The eyes, the stillness, the quiet confidence. Where Camilla's children had pushed forward for space, Charlotte had never needed to. Her presence was effortless, uncalculated, and that made it more powerful.
I commit myself to serve you all, King, country, and Commonwealth. God save the King.
In the wake of the decree, as headlines speculated and tensions flared behind palace walls, Charlotte's image began appearing more often. She stood beside her mother at engagements, walked with her brothers through crowds, and waved gently from balconies. She didn't seek the camera, but it found her. And in her presence, many saw something deeper than the continuation of Diana's bloodline. The grace that had once belonged to Diana now quietly rested in her granddaughter's gestures. Charles noticed. Everyone did. And for the first time in years, the monarchy had something it desperately needed: a new emotional center. Charlotte didn't know it, of course. She was still a child, but within the palace, her symbolism grew. She represented not just future stability, but moral correction. The decree had removed those who had no royal blood, and in doing so, cleared the space for Charlotte to emerge, unchallenged, unblurred by outside affiliations. The monarchy was realigning itself, not by force, but by story, by blood, by visibility. In choosing to act, Charles hadn't just preserved the lineage, he had opened the path for a new chapter, one that returned the spotlight to those born within its ancient walls, one that asked the public to look forward while quietly bowing to the past. And in doing so, he had taken the first step toward restoring the version of monarchy Diana had always hoped her children and their children would inherit.
My brother and I love each other. I love him deeply. There has been a lot of pain between the two of us, especially the last 6 years. None of anything that I've written and anything I've included is ever intended to hurt my family.
In the hours after the decree was signed, Camilla vanished from public view. No statements, no appearances, no carefully curated photo ops. But behind palace doors, silence did not mean surrender. What had been taken from her in one calculated act would not be allowed to disappear without consequence. Those closest to her described a change, something sharper beneath the composure. Camilla had weathered decades of hostility, judgment, and public disdain. She had survived scandals, rebuilt her image, and stood beside a man who once thought the world would never forgive him. Now, after years of holding the line, she had been blindsided not by the public, but by the one person she had stood beside through it all. And this time, she wasn't going to fade quietly. Privately, Camilla demanded an audience with the king. The meeting, held in absolute secrecy, was described as emotionally charged. She was furious at how the decision was made without her prior knowledge. No warning, no consultation, no respect for the years she had devoted to helping Charles rebuild the public's trust in him, in them, in the institution itself. But beneath the emotional wreckage was something colder, more strategic. Camilla understood the monarchy not just as a system. She didn't need titles to fight back. She only needed what the monarchy feared most: memory. Over the next 48 hours, whispers began to spread. Journalists in Europe and beyond reported that private communications may have been exchanged between Camilla's representatives and foreign media contacts. No interviews were aired. No leaks were confirmed. But suddenly, speculation turned sharp. Questions resurfaced. Old wounds reopened. Stories that had been quietly retired. The timeline of Charles's early relationship with Camilla.
Have been brought closer because of the circumstances as well. That's the thing. Yeah. You are, uniquely bonded because of what we've been through. Yeah.
The overlap with Diana and the tensions within the family found their way back into circulation. And this time, the tone was different, less forgiving, more surgical. Inside Clarence House, damage control teams were activated. Internal phones were secured. Staff were briefed on non-disclosure enforcement. Legal teams reviewed protocols surrounding correspondence, archives, and Camilla's ongoing access to royal resources. Nothing concrete had been released, but the threat hung in the air like smoke before a fire. Camilla had never wanted war. But now, her family had been cut from royal life entirely. Her children humiliated. Her influence erased in a single afternoon. She had nothing left to protect but her version of the truth, and she was willing to let the world see it. To her children, she sent a private message, one that insiders say was brief but resolute. Not a plea for peace, but a quiet call to arms. She wasn't defending privilege anymore. She was defending relevance, legacy, and a right to be remembered not as a mistake, but as a part of the crown's journey. The palace, always an engine of control, now faced something far more volatile, an uncontrolled narrative. And for the first time in decades, the threat to royal stability wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from a woman who had once helped restore it. The monarchy had redrawn the lines. But Camilla was no longer asking for inclusion. She was preparing to redraw the map. A monarchy at war with itself. The royal family has weathered wars, abdications, divorces, and public scandals. But this was different. It wasn't a constitutional crisis. It was a personal one, a private reckoning that had spilled into the public arena, dragging ghosts, loyalties, and unfinished legacies into the light. Camilla disappeared from public life. No statements, no apologies, no denials. Her silence, though outwardly quiet, echoed with implication. Inside sources said she had entered a kind of self-imposed exile, limiting contact with senior royals while her advisors quietly explored legal pathways. The issue wasn't succession. Her children had no rightful claim. But in a world where legacy is written in headlines and perception shapes power, symbolic erasure carries its own kind of violence. Behind closed doors, her children began consulting legal experts. The questions weren't about the throne. They were about access, honors, property, and standing. And while they moved discreetly, the threat was clear. If the palace had closed its doors, they might force them open in court. Meanwhile, Charles remained silent. No public address, no formal statement. The king, who had made the most emotionally charged decision of his reign, refused to explain himself. Insiders described him as exhausted, hollowed by consequence, but unwavering in belief. The letter from Diana had awakened something in him that no advisor, spouse, or press office could quiet. He had made a promise to a woman long gone, and he intended to keep it. Into the vacuum left by Camilla's departure, another royal figure stepped quietly forward.
My mother would have known that she'd been deceived. She was failed not just by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way rather than asking the tough questions.
Charlotte. Her presence began to define a new tone, one not shaped by ambition or survival, but by innocence, legacy, and quiet strength. At every appearance, she reminded the world of the one person the crown had never been able to fully replace. Diana lived on in her, not just in features or gestures, but in the intangible way she anchored public affection. With Camilla removed from view and her children stripped of standing, Charlotte became more than a royal child. She became a symbol, a through line from Diana to the future of the crown. And while no one said it aloud, even Charles seemed to find a measure of comfort in that truth. But beneath the surface, the family remained fractured. The monarchy had survived the decision, but not without scars. Relationships strained, trust broken, a queen consort alienated, and a king who now carried the weight of both history and consequence. This was not just the end of a chapter. It was the drawing of a hard boundary between legacy and ambition, between blood and bond, between what the monarchy had become and what it was now fighting to be again. And while Princess Charlotte rises quietly at the center of the public's affection, the legacy she now carries is heavier than most will ever know. The monarchy has been protected, but its peace has been broken. And in the silence that follows, one truth lingers: not all wounds are meant to heal. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We will see you in the next video.